Imagine Apple taking the stage tomorrow to announce the brand new iPhone.
Right, the whole world is watching.
Exactly, the whole world is watching. But when they pull the sheet off, there is no camera.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, the screen is black and white. And the CEO proudly announces that, this new model is explicitly designed so you can finally do your taxes on the subway.
I mean, people would think they completely lost their minds.
Right. You would think they lost their minds. Why would a company sitting at the absolute zenith of its cultural and financial power deliberately alienate the millions of people who love what they do?
Just to chase an entirely different, incredibly boring market.
Yes, exactly. To chase accountants on the subway.
It sounds like corporate sabotage, honestly.
Right.
But it is actually one of the most common and really one of the most dangerous traps in tech history.
It happens so often.
It really does.
Huh.
A company completely dominates one sector. They decide they've outgrown it, and they try to pivot into serious territory.
Yeah, the air quotes around serious.
Yeah, right. And they forget entirely why you, the consumer, bought their product in the first place.
So today on The Deep Dive, we are dissecting the absolute pinnacle of that specific brand of corporate hubris. We are heading all the way back to 1984.
A very good year for baffling tech decisions.
The best year for it. We are going to look at the Commodore Plus4, and we are doing this through an incredibly meticulous, deeply critical bench test from the October 1984 issue of Personal Computer World.
Oh, penned by Tony Hetherington. It is such a great piece.
It is. It is a vital piece of tech archaeology.
It really is, yeah. To really grasp the sheer bewilderment surrounding this machine, you have to understand Commodore's position at that exact moment.
Right, because they were huge.
Huge is an understatement. They hadn't just succeeded, they had conquered. The Commodore 64 was an absolute juggernaut.
The undisputed king of the home microcomputer market.
Exactly. You had millions of kids and hobbyists writing games, learning to code, trading software with each other.
The C64 was practically a religion for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was.
So naturally, the expectation for their next big release was just sky high. Everyone is waiting for the ultimate gaming powerhouse.
Right, a machine with better graphics, wilder sound, more memory for these massive games.
But instead, what do they get? Commodore delivers a charcoal gray box labeled as an inexpensive home and small business micro.
Which is just devastating if you're a gamer.
Totally. They completely turned their backs on the vibrant, chaotic gaming community that literally built their empire, all just to court the small business owner.
So let's start with the sheer physical shock of this thing. Because the bizarre decisions really begin the second you take it out of the box.
Oh yeah, the aesthetic shift was jarring.
If you owned a C64, you were used to that bulky, friendly, beige breadbox shape.
Right. It looked like something you could comfortably rest your wrists on for hours while you coded.
Exactly. The Plus4, though, it looked like it belonged on a mid-level accountant's desk in some brutalist office building.
It was incredibly compact, wasn't it?
Very. Hetherington noted in his review that, well, while it wasn't quite as small as the Sinclair Spectrum, it was likely the smallest machine on the market to successfully integrate a full QWERTY typewriter-style keyboard.
That is actually impressive engineering for the time.
It is, yeah. And it had these dedicated function and cursor keys. It featured this very stark charcoal gray plastic casing, and the keys themselves were mounted on a flat plate sitting on top of an angled plinth.
He compared the shape to the Auric Atmos.
He did, yes. The Atmos had this very distinct, sweeping wedge profile. It definitely looked significantly more modern than the old C64 breadbox.
And from what I read in the source, the physical typing experience was a genuine upgrade.
Oh, absolutely. The keys were off-white, they were nicely sculpted, and despite requiring a very light touch to actuate, Hetherington reported 0 issues with overtyping.
No accidental key presses, which is a miracle for early keyboards.
Exactly. For a machine pitching itself to people who are writing letters and balancing ledgers all day, getting the keyboard right was crucial. And, they actually did.
They really packed an enormous amount of utility onto that board, too. Like almost every single letter and number key had dual purposes.
Right, the secondary functions.
Yeah, you could access a whole secondary layer of graphics characters or command functions just by holding down the shift or that dedicated Commodore key.
They also introduced 4 gray function keys across the top row.
Which was a big deal then.
It was. Because when you combine those with the shift key, that provided 7 programmable functions, plus a dedicated HLP key.
We will definitely talk about that HLP key later because it is hilarious.
Oh, it is deeply funny. But having it at all was quite a novelty for home micros at the time.
I do want to highlight the cursor keys, though, because on the older Commodore machines, navigating around the screen to fix a typo is just incredibly clunky.
Made it terrible.
You had these two weird keys that you had to use with the shift key just to move up, down, left, and right. It made no sense.
Right. The Plus4 finally adopted a cluster of 4 dedicated directional arrows grouped together on the bottom right.
Like we have today.
Exactly. It is known as the MSX style layout. It was a massive ergonomic leap. It meant your fingers could just fly around a spreadsheet or a document with actual precision.
So, okay, the computer itself is sleek, the keyboard is great, it looks professional.
Right up until you reach into the box to grab the power cable.
Oh my goodness, yes, the power brick.
Commodore shipped this tiny, elegant computer with the exact same power supply block they used for the C64. A giant, heavy, beige brick.
Hetherington was ruthless about this in the review. He stated plainly that the power unit looks ridiculous alongside the Plus4 and should just be hidden at all times.
It is infuriating from design perspective.
Totally. Think about buying a razor-thin, beautiful, modern laptop today, and the manufacturer forces you to carry around a charging brick the size of a cinder block from, like a 1998 Dell Inspiron.
It completely ruins the whole aesthetic on your desk.
It perfectly encapsulates the tension inside Commodore, I think. The design team was clearly trying to push forward into a sleek, professional future.
But the supply chain and accounting departments mandated that they use up the massive stockpile of existing power supplies in the warehouse.
Right. The aesthetic vision was immediately compromised by cost cutting.
And that tension between design and cost cutting is really nothing compared to the absolute hostility they showed their existing user base regarding the ports.
Oh, the port situation. Let's map out the connectivity.
Sure. So on the right-hand side, you've got your on-off switch and a reset button. On the left, a standard TV output.
Okay, pretty standard so far.
Right. But then across the back panel, there is the power input, a serial port, a cassette tape port, a general I/O port, a slot for memory expansion cartridges, 2 joystick ports, and a dedicated video output for monitors.
Okay, wait, we have to pause here. The joystick ports and the cassette port.
Yep, here it comes.
I read this part of the bench test 3 times because I just couldn't believe the audacity. If you are a Commodore 64 or a VIC-20 owner, you already own standard Atari-style joysticks.
Right, so everyone had them.
And you probably own a dataset tape drive. But the Plus4 physically changed the shape of the joystick and cassette ports to a completely new proprietary standard.
Commodore's official reasoning for the joystick change was that it would allow users to plug in their new quote-unquote advanced joysticks.
But that was complete nonsense.
That was entirely fabricated.
Hetherington specifically tested these so-called advanced joysticks and wrote that he could not find a single spectacular feature to justify abandoning the industry standard ports.
There was absolutely no technical reason for the change.
And they pulled the exact same trick with the cassette tape port. They forced anyone who wanted to load tape software to buy the brand new Commodore 1531 dataset.
Which, again, Hetherington noted, operated identically to the older 1530 model.
I mean, there was no speed increase, no new capability.
None at all. It was the exact same mechanism with a different plug on the end of the wire.
This is such a deeply cynical, anti-consumer move.
It really is.
Imagine if you bought a new phone today and the manufacturer changed the charging port standard purely so none of your old cables worked.
Just forcing you to buy all new accessories directly from them?
It is alienating. You have this massive army of loyal Commodore fans who might be considering upgrading to a more professional machine, and you basically tell them, you know, by the way, all your old gear goes in the trash.
It creates an immediate psychological friction. You are actively punishing the very people who funded your success.
But then if you look at the serial port, the story gets even more confused, doesn't it?
Oh, it makes no sense. While they locked users out of their cheap legacy joysticks and tape drives, that serial port on the back was perfectly happy to accept the notoriously slow, incredibly common 1541 floppy disk drive from the C64 era.
Wait, really? So they kept the old standard for the expensive disk drive?
Yes. Hetherington did mention that a bug-free 1542 version in a different colored box was supposedly coming soon.
Which implies the 1541 had its share of issues.
Oh, it certainly did. It was famous for rattling itself out of alignment.
Yeah.
But the point is, the legacy support was incredibly selective.
And it was based purely on economics, not engineering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the I/O port on the back was specifically designed to take an RS-232 adapter plug, meaning you could hook this machine up to a modem.
So they're cutting off the gamers by killing standard joystick support, but explicitly providing pathways to high-end business peripherals like modems and disk drives.
That was the strategy.
Okay, so they changed the ports, alienated the gamers, and fully committed to the business user. If you are going to make a pivot that aggressive, the processing architecture inside this machine needs to be an absolute powerhouse, right?
You certainly assume so.
It needs to justify the betrayal.
Right. So let's talk about the brain of the Plus4. It is the 7501 processor. Now, this is a direct descendant of the legendary 6502 chip that powered the C64, the Apple II, just countless other machines.
So it's a solid pedigree.
It is. But the 7501 in the Plus4 has a very bizarre quirk. Its clock speed, meaning how fast it can actually process instructions, fluctuates wildly between 0.89 and 1.76 megahertz.
How is that even possible? I mean, a processor doesn't just get tired and slow down. What is actually making it fluctuate?
It comes down to a shared memory bus architecture, and specifically how this system handles drawing graphics on the screen.
Okay, explain that for us.
Think of the computer's RAM as a giant filing cabinet, and the CPU as an office worker trying to read those files.
Got it.
But there is another worker in the office, and that is the video chip. Its only job is to look at the files and draw whatever is in them onto your television screen 50 or 60 times a second.
Okay, I follow the analogy.
The problem is they both have to walk through the exact same narrow doorway to get to the filing cabinet.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. When the screen is relatively empty, or just displaying simple text, the video chip doesn't need to look at the files very often. So the CPU can run at its full 1.76 megahertz speed.
But when things get complicated.
The moment you put complex, high-resolution graphics on the screen, the video chip has to constantly rush back and forth through that doorway to figure out where every single pixel goes.
And the CPU just has to stand there and wait its turn.
Precisely. The video chip essentially halts the main CPU to get the memory access it needs. So the heavier the visual load on the screen, the slower the computer's actual brain runs. It drops all the way down to 0.89 megahertz.
Hetherington pointed out this felt like a huge step backward, didn't he?
He did. He compared it to the old Sinclair ZX81 from years earlier, which had a notorious fast and slow mode depending on whether it was drawing the screen.
It just feels so unoptimized for a machine marketed as a technological step forward.
It is a massive architectural compromise. Think about it. When your spreadsheet gets too complicated to display, the very processor trying to calculate your math slows down to accommodate drawing the screen.
That is just bad design. Let's look at the memory itself, that filing cabinet we talked about.
The machine comes with 64 kilobytes of RAM in total. Out of that, the user has access to just over 60K for their own programs and data.
Okay, that sounds pretty good for 1984.
It does, but going back to that hungry video chip, if you instruct the computer to switch into high-resolution graphics mode, you lose 10K of that RAM instantly.
Wow, just gone.
Yep, it drops your available memory to around 50K.
Because the computer needs a dedicated chunk of that filing cabinet just to remember whether every single dot on a high-resolution screen is turned on or off.
Exactly. It's called a frame buffer. But the really fascinating part of the internal architecture isn't just the RAM. It is the massive amount of ROM, or read-only memory.
These are the chips that have software permanently burned into them at the factory, right?
Yes. Alongside the CPU, there is a substantial bank of ROM chips. They hold 32K of space just for the new basic 3.5 operating system.
That's a huge operating system for the time.
It is, and there is another whopping 20K dedicated solely to the built-in 3+1 software suite.
We are definitely going to tear into that software suite later because honestly, it is the whole reason this computer exists.
It really is.
But before we do, we have to talk about what they removed from the motherboard. Because this is the part where Commodore loyalists absolutely lost their minds. They basically gutted the soul of the Commodore 64.
They systematically removed all the gaming hardware.
They abandoned hardware sprites. Now, if you aren't familiar with 1980s game programming, a sprite is a really clever hardware trick.
It was revolutionary.
Yeah, it is a little graphical object like a spaceship or a Mario that the video chip handles entirely independently from the background.
Right. Without sprites, if you want a spaceship to fly over a star field, the main processor has to mathematically redraw the background, draw the ship, erase the ship, and then redraw the background again dozens of times a second.
Which is incredibly taxing on the CPU. Sprites act like clear plastic overlays.
That's a great way to describe it.
You just tell the video chip, move this overlay 5 pixels to the left, and the hardware does it effortlessly without disturbing the background. The Commodore 64 had incredible sprite capabilities.
It is exactly why the games on that system were so smooth.
And the Plus4 just ripped them out entirely.
Gone.
But they didn't stop there. They also killed the SID chip, the sound interface device.
That was truly a tragedy.
The C64 wasn't just a computer. It was a bona fide musical instrument. It had this 3-oscillator synthesizer chip that created some of the most iconic, rich, thumping music of the whole decade.
And what did the Plus4 replace it with?
A sound generator capable of producing 2 simultaneous tones on a single channel.
It is essentially a sophisticated peeper.
It is criminal. I mean, you take the greatest gaming machine on Earth, you rip out the graphics engine, you rip out the legendary synthesizer, you change the joystick ports so nobody can use their old gear, and you hand it to accountants to run spreadsheets.
It is a fundamental betrayal of the platform.
It really is.
But if you step back and look at the engineering reality, you can kind of see how this happened. The corporate mandate came down. Build a serious business machine for cheap.
Right.
The engineers looked at the board and realized that business users do not need smooth scrolling spaceships or 3-part musical harmonies to balance a ledger. So they stripped out the expensive SID chip and the sprite hardware to lower the manufacturing cost.
But even with those cost-saving measures, the hardware inside the machine felt wildly unfinished.
It was a mess.
Hetherington's bench test unit was supposed to be a final pre-production model, but he actually opened the case, and what he found was shocking.
He described the motherboard as just a literal spaghetti of patching wire.
Patching wires.
Yeah. In hardware development, if you print a circuit board and realize a connection is missing or broken, you literally solder a physical wire across the top of the board to bridge the gap.
So it's just a quick fix.
Right. It's a hack.
Yeah.
Hetherington's unit was covered in them. It also relied heavily on EPROMs, which stands for Erasable Programmable Read-Only Memory.
Which are basically temporary rewritable memory chips used during prototyping, right? Like they have that little glass window on top so you can erase them with ultraviolet light.
Exactly. You would never, ever ship a final consumer product with those.
A final product uses masked ROMs where the software is physically etched into the silicon permanently.
Yes. So the presence of EPROMs and hand-soldered wires proved that Commodore was just rushing this machine out the door.
They were trying to project this image of a polished, finalized business micro, but behind the plastic casing, it was held together by the engineering equivalent of duct tape.
It really paints a picture of panic behind the scenes.
So put yourself in the shoes of a home programmer in 1984. You have migrated from a VC20 or a C64. You turn this thing on, you realize you have no hardware sprites to easily move graphics around.
It must have been terrifying.
How on earth are you supposed to make anything look good on this screen?
Well, the burden shifted entirely from the hardware to the software, specifically to the massively overhauled operating system, BASIC 3.5.
Yeah.
Commodore knew they took away the hardware shortcuts, so they had to give programmers a robust set of software tools to compensate.
And this is where we have to talk about the agony of the old Pico commands.
Oh, the PQs.
If you were a seasoned Commodore user, you didn't have a command to just draw a line. If you wanted to change the color of a specific spot on the screen, you had to find the exact numerical memory address of that spot and use the poke command to inject a specific number into it.
It was tedious beyond belief.
It was like trying to paint a mural by calling someone on the phone and giving them the coordinate grid for every single brushstroke.
BASIC 3.5 eradicated that tedium, thankfully. It introduced a suite of high-level, modern graphics commands.
So you could just use normal words.
Yes. Suddenly, you didn't need to understand complex memory maps to draw something. You just typed ddraw and gave it the start and end coordinates for a line. You had commands like box to instantly create rectangles and circle.
Hetherington was genuinely impressed by the paint command, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. The paint command was remarkably sophisticated for a built-in BASIC interpreter of that era. It wasn't just for filling in simple squares. It could fill highly irregular, complex shapes.
That is pretty advanced for 1984.
Furthermore, the math routines built into BASIC 3.5 allowed you to rotate these shapes and boxes through any angle on the screen.
Oh, wow.
That requires significant trigonometric calculation under the hood. So providing that to a novice programmer as a single text command was a major empowerment.
The color palette got a massive upgrade too, right? The C64 had 16 fixed colors.
Right, and the Plus4 boasted 121 colors.
121? That sounds amazing.
Well, technically it was a base palette of 15 core colors plus black, but the innovation was that each of those 15 colors had 8 different selectable luminance levels.
Oh, I see.
Meaning you could take a core red and choose 8 different shades of brightness for it.
Which is incredible for 1984, but it wasn't exactly a free-for-all, was it? Let's talk about how those colors actually behaved in the different screen modes, because there are some severe limitations here.
There really are. The primary high-resolution graphics screen gave you a grid of 320 by 200 pixels. That's very sharp. But the limitation lies in how the video chip manages memory. To save RAM, the computer divides the screen into an invisible grid of 8 by 8 pixel squares. Within any one of those tiny squares, you are strictly limited to displaying exactly 2 colors.
One foreground color and one background color.
Exactly.
Right, the notorious attribute clash problem.
Imagine a coloring book where the rule is you can only hold 2 crayons at a time for any given square inch of the page.
Okay.
If you draw a blue sky and a yellow sun, that's fine. But if you try to draw a green bird flying across that specific square inch where the yellow and blue already exist, the computer simply can't handle a third color.
So what happens? Does it crash?
No, it will forcefully change the bird's color to match the background, or it will corrupt the sun's color. The colors bleed into each other based on that rigid 8 by 8 grid.
So if you wanted more colors in a dense area, what did you actually do?
You had to drop down into a Commodore called multicolor mode.
Multicolor mode.
This mode essentially traded sharpness for color depth. It halved the horizontal resolution, dropping the screen from 320 pixels wide to just 160 pixels wide.
Oh, so your pixels literally became twice as fat.
Yes, but in exchange, the video chip allowed each individual character block to display more simultaneous colors without clashing.
And it's worth noting that in both of these graphics modes, Commodore made a very smart interface decision. They reserved the bottom 5 lines of the television screen as a dedicated text window.
Which is crucial for programming. It meant you could type a command, execute it, watch the graphics render on the top portion of the screen, and still see your command line and any error messages on the bottom.
Without the graphics obscuring your interface.
Right. They also added a print using command, which sounds trivial today, but for a business machine, it was mandatory.
Oh, absolutely. If you are writing a program to print out invoices, the old versions of BASIC made it incredibly hard to line up decimal points. You'd print a column of numbers, and it would look jagged and messy.
You looked unprofessional.
Print using allowed you to define a strict template, ensuring that the bound signs and the decimal points aligned perfectly in vertical columns on your printout.
But the absolute crown jewel of the ROM, especially for hardcore developers, was a built-in piece of software called Tedmon.
Tedmon. It sounds like a guy you hired to fix your boiler.
Right. Tedmon is here to check the pipes. But no, it was a machine code monitor.
Which means what, exactly?
Well, BASIC is a high-level language. It's easy for humans to read, but the computer has to translate every word into machine code on the fly, which is slow.
Okay.
Professional software, like games or word processors, they're written directly in machine code, the raw language of the processor.
Because it's faster.
Exactly. Tedmon allowed a programmer to bypass BASIC entirely. Through a series of just 10 commands, you could peek directly into the raw memory blocks, alter them, and even assemble or disassemble the 6502 processor's actual instruction set right on the screen.
That is pretty cool.
Having a monitor built directly into the firmware was an absolute dream for software developers.
But here is the rub. If you are that migrating user, you boot this machine up, and you immediately run into an agonizing learning curve because the software environment is deeply schizophrenic.
Hetherington described it as an odd mixture of the old and the new.
Yeah.
Commodore claimed BASIC 3.5 contained familiar commands from older machines, but they integrated them right alongside these highly advanced new drawing and looping commands.
Which sounds good on paper.
It does, but it meant a veteran Commodore user's muscle memory was constantly betraying them.
The debugging tools alone were just a masterclass in frustration. Let's talk about the escape key.
Oh, the escape key.
On most computers, escape cancels an action.
Right.
But on the Plus4, it was the most overworked key on the board. They tied it to a brand new full-screen editing system.
It was so convoluted.
If you wanted to scroll a lineup, you didn't just use the arrow keys. You had to press escape and then another key. Same for inserting characters or defining a window on the screen or deleting text to the end of a line.
It was an entirely new syntax you had to memorize just to edit your text.
But the most baffling design choice, and I think we can both agree on this, was how they implemented the HELP key.
It is genuinely unbelievable.
This might be my favorite anecdote from the entire review. Imagine you are typing out a massive multi-statement line of code. It's 80 characters long. You hit return to run it, and the computer just halts and spits out syntax error in line 100.
Which is fundamentally useless, because you do not know which part of that massive line contains the error. You just know something somewhere is wrong.
Exactly. So you look down at the keyboard and you see a shiny gray key labeled HELP. You press it, assuming it's going to bring up a glossary or maybe an explanation of what the syntax error means.
Like a normal computer would.
Right. But instead, the computer just reprints your broken line of code on the screen and starts violently flashing the specific character where the error occurred.
It doesn't actually tell you how to fix the problem. It just points a flashing digital finger at your mistake.
It's not a HELP key. It's an error locator key.
It is so aggressively unhelpful. And it gets weirder.
Tell me about the auto command.
So if you want the computer to automatically generate line numbers for you as you type code, say line 10, then line 20, line 30, you usually use an auto command.
Right.
On previous machines, if you just typed auto and hit return, the computer would assume you wanted to start at 10 and count by tens.
It's the logical default.
But on the Plus4, if you just type auto on its own, it completely reverses expectations. It actually turns off the automatic line numbering.
Wait, it turns it off?
Yes. You have to explicitly type auto 10 to get it to work.
It's just this constant low-level friction. Everything you think you know about Commodore programming is slightly irritatingly wrong.
It paints a picture of an operating system developed in silos, lacking a unifying vision for the overall user experience.
But to Commodore's executives, these programming quirks didn't really matter, did they?
Not at all.
The target audience wasn't supposed to be writing code anyway. The entire justification for this machine, the reason they gutted the gaming hardware, was to pivot to business users.
Yeah.
And their ultimate weapon to capture that market was built right into the ROM chips.
The 3+1 software suite. This was the big gamble. 4 complete business applications hardwired directly into the computer.
Now, we have to acknowledge how revolutionary the concept of instant-on software was in 1984.
Absolutely. It was mind-blowing at the time.
If you wanted to use a word processor on a C64, you had to find the cassette tape, put it in the drive, type the load command, and sit there for 5 minutes listening to the tape screech and whir.
Just praying the load didn't crash the last second.
With the Plus4, you physically flicked the power switch, and within a fraction of a second, the screen displayed a message telling you BASIC 3.5 was ready, with 60,671 bytes free.
And right below that, a simple prompt, press F1 to enter the software.
You hit F1, and instantly you are inside a professional software suite. No tapes, no discs, no waiting.
The immediacy of that experience cannot be overstated. It felt incredibly futuristic.
It was an incredible hook to get people into the store. But once they got it home, well, let's talk about the reality of using these applications.
Let's do it.
And we should start by pointing out that Commodore didn't even bother to give them distinct names. The manual just referred to them generically as the word processor, the spreadsheet, the file manager, and the graphics package.
It's so uninspired. It feels like they just gave up.
Tony Hetherington actually found it so tedious to write about them generically that he invented names for them in his review.
He called the word processor subscript because it was essentially a stripped-down, lesser version of the EasyScript software already available for the C64.
And what did he call the others?
He called the spreadsheet 4Calc and the database 4Base.
Let's analyze subscript first. A word processor's fundamental job is to let you see what you are writing so you can format it properly. Subscript fails this basic test due to the hardware limitations of the Plus4 itself.
Right, because the screen only displays 40 columns of text horizontally.
Explain why that is a problem for a business user.
A standard business letter printed on A4 paper is roughly 80 columns wide. Subscript allows you to type an 80-column document, but you are viewing it through a 40-column window on your television.
So you can only see half the page at a time.
Exactly. As you type past the middle of the page, the entire screen aggressively scrolls sideways to follow your cursor.
It's like trying to read a broadsheet newspaper through a magnifying glass. You can never see the whole sentence at once.
It is incredibly disorienting.
But that's not even the worst part. Let's talk about formatting. Say you want to center a title or set the margins for a paragraph.
In modern software, you click a button and the text magically centers on the screen. In Subscript, you have to embed specialized formatting commands, literally control characters, directly into your text.
You are basically typing raw instructions for the printer.
And Subscript doesn't hide those commands. It displays every single control character right there on the screen, directly in line with your text.
So your business letter is just littered with bizarre squiggles, brackets, and alphanumeric codes.
It becomes a dense, unreadable thicket of algebra.
It entirely negates the concept of WYSIYG, right? What you see is what you get.
Completely.
Yeah.
Because of the 40-column window and the visible control codes, looking at the screen gives you absolutely zero indication of what the final printed page will look like.
The only way to know if your margins are correct is to physically print the document onto paper.
Realize it's wrong, adjust the codes, and print it all over again.
It's an enormous waste of time and printer ribbon.
So the word processor is a structural nightmare. Let's look at 4Calc, the spreadsheet program.
The primary constraint here is the 60K of RAM, isn't it?
Yes, the software limits your spreadsheet to a maximum of 50 rows by 17 columns. That yields exactly 850 active cells.
850 cells. If you were doing basic household budgeting, like tracking your grocery expenses for the month, that's perfectly fine.
Sure.
But if you are trying to run a multi-tiered small business inventory, you're going to run out of space very quickly.
But again, the major friction point is the visual interface. Subscript suffered from a 40-column window. 4Calc restricts your view even further. At any given moment, the screen only displays 3 rows and 12 columns.
It's a tiny porthole. You are looking at 36 cells at a time out of 850.
And it gets more constrained. A cell can technically hold up to 36 characters of data or formulas, but the screen only has the real estate to display the first 11 characters.
Wait, so you can't even see the full formula you've written?
No, you have to select the cell and look at a separate command line just to read your own formula.
To be fair to Commodore, Hetherington did praise the editing tools within 4Calc. It wasn't completely terrible.
Wasn't, no.
You could insert a new row right in the middle of your data or delete a column, and it handled the shifts smoothly. You could easily duplicate entire rows to speed up data entry. The fundamental math logic worked.
It was a functional, if claustrophobic, calculator. But then we arrive at the fourth application.
Oh boy.
The module that was supposed to elevate this from a collection of tools into a professional suite. The business graphics package.
This is the single most baffling, hilarious failure of the entire machine. Remember, the Plus4 has an overhauled basic 3.5. It has 121 colors. It has dedicated, high-resolution drawing commands for boxes, circles, and complex shapes.
The hardware is fully capable of rendering gorgeous charts.
Exactly. So you have finished your accounting in 4Calc. You want to generate a visual representation of your profits for a meeting.
You type the command GRR to activate the graphics package. And what does this state-of-the-art integrated business machine produce?
It generates one single type of chart, a bar graph, and it does not use the high-resolution graphics. It does not draw smooth, clean boxes.
What does it do?
It literally just stacks the hashtag symbol on top of itself.
Hashtag, 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 hashtag.
That is your bar chart, a jagged tower of hash marks. And there are no axis lines. There are no scales indicating what the numbers even are. It is just a floating pile of symbols.
It is genuinely hard to believe.
Imagine putting on your best suit, walking into a bank in 1984 to ask for a small business loan, and sliding a piece of paper across the desk where your projected revenue is just a pyramid of hash marks.
It is deeply embarrassing software.
It makes no sense.
It highlights a staggering disconnect within the development team. The engineers built a machine with advanced graphical capabilities, and the software team completely ignored them, opting instead to generate charts using raw ASCII text characters.
But Hetherington points out that the real evaluation of this suite isn't just looking at the apps in isolation. Commodore marketed this as an integrated suite.
Right.
The real test is the workflow. How does a daily home user actually pass data between these flawed applications to get a final product?
The architecture of the suite relies heavily on Subscript, the word processor. It acts as the central hub. You cannot boot directly into the spreadsheet or the database.
You always have to go through the word processor.
Yes. You must enter through Subscript, and crucially, you cannot print anything from the other applications. Everything must be passed back to Subscript to be formatted for the printer.
So let's walk through a realistic workflow. Let's narrate the exact keystrokes. You turn the machine on, you hit F1, you are now staring at Subscript.
Okay, I'm with you.
You need to do your accounts, so you type TC, which stands for Tech Calculator. Now the screen shifts, and you are in 4Calc. You spend an hour entering your numbers through that tiny 3-row porthole.
Now you want that visual aid. Still in 4Calc, you type GR, and the system generates that pathetic hashmark bar chart.
But you can't print it. You have to send it back to the hub. So you execute a transfer command and pass that hash chart into Subscript. Now it just looks like a text document full of hashtags.
And this is where the sheer absurdity of the workflow peaks.
Tell me about the workaround for this ugly chart.
Because the chart is so ugly, Hetherington details a literal workaround. He explains that you must use Subscript's built-in search and replace word processing utility.
You have got to be kidding me.
No, you instruct the software to scan the document, find every instance of the hashtag symbol, and replace it with a more visually pleasing character from the Commodore graphics set, like a solid square block.
You are literally using a word processor's typo correction tool to hack a bar chart into looking like a solid object.
It is a symphony of manual workarounds. It is not an integrated chart object that updates when your numbers change. It is just dead text that you have to manually massage to look presentable.
And if you want to integrate actual spreadsheet data into a report, the suite does offer a split-screen function, right?
It does. You can dedicate the bottom half of your television to the 4Calc spreadsheet and the top half to your Subscript document.
Which is actually a very smart feature for the time.
It is. It allows you to visually line up where you want to drop your financial data into the text of your report. But again, it requires a lot of manual maneuvering by the user.
And if you thought the spreadsheet workflow was tedious, let's talk about 4base, the database manager.
Right, the database. The first thing to note is that to use 4base in any meaningful capacity, you absolutely must own a floppy disk drive. The cassette tape drive is entirely insufficient for database work.
Because tapes are just too slow to search.
Exactly. So you've bought the expensive drive, you enter 4base from the Subscript hub. Your very first task is to set up a new database, say, a customer mailing list.
Okay, how hard could that be?
Well, 4base initiates a sequential question and answer loop. It asks you to name the first field. You type first name. Then it asks you to strictly define the maximum character lengths for that field.
Which means you have to guess the longest possible name any future customer might have and lock it in.
Exactly. Once you define all your fields, address, phone number, all that, 4base has to format the floppy disk to accept the data. Because it writes the records directly to the disk sectors, it utilizes a proprietary formatting routine.
And this is the part that would drive a user insane. Formatting a standard disk takes a while, but 4base takes between 100 and 160 seconds to format a assembled disk for a new database.
That is nearly 3 minutes of sitting completely still, listening to the disk drive violently grind and click, unable to touch the keyboard. It is an eternity in computing time.
And the constraints are brutal. Even on a completely blank disk, 4base caps your database at an absolute maximum of 999 records.
And you probably won't even reach that limit.
Why not?
Because Hetherington noted that after the agonizing format process, you might look at the disk directory and realize you only have 140 free blocks of storage left.
Where did all the space go?
4base preemptively steals a massive portion of the disk space and reserves it solely for sorting routines. If you ask the database to alphabetize your 900 customers, it needs empty space on the disk to temporarily shuffle that data around.
And heaven help you if you decide to save a Subscript letter or a 4Calc spreadsheet onto that same floppy disk, you will overwrite the sorting space and instantly corrupt your entire database.
You have to keep a dedicated, cleanly formatted disk for every single database you run.
But if you navigate the disk formatting, and you tolerate the small spreadsheet windows, and you fix your hashtag charts with search and replace, you do eventually reach the holy grail of 1980s office software.
Mail merge.
Exactly. You sit in Subscript, and you write a standardized form letter. Dear blank, thank you for your purchase of blank. But instead of typing names, you embed specific control codes that correspond to the fields in your 4base database.
Then you execute the merge. The computer reaches out to the disk drive, pulls the first customer's name and product, seamlessly injects them into the letter, sends it to the printer, and immediately starts on the next customer.
For a small club secretary or a guy running a mail order business out of his garage in 1984, watching that printer churn out 50 highly personalized letters automatically, it was indistinguishable from magic.
It was the singular payoff of the entire machine. The ability to move data laterally across those ROMs without constantly swapping tapes or disks was genuinely powerful.
It proved that the concept of an integrated ROM suite was valid, even if Commodore's execution of the individual applications was deeply flawed.
So we have this complete picture now. You have an integrated ROM suite that requires a massive amount of manual hacking and workarounds to produce a decent result.
It is housed inside a machine that has deliberately gutted its gaming hardware.
It changed its physical ports to alienate its loyal fan base.
And runs on a processor that slows down when it has to draw the screen.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. Who was supposed to buy this, and how much did it cost? we have to examine the economic reality of the Plus4.
Let's lay out the brutal economics, and we need to translate this so you can actually feel the financial weight of this decision today. We are going to run these 1984 prices through the inflation calculator to give us the equivalent value in 2026 British pounds.
The cumulative inflation rate in the UK between 1984 and 2026 dictates that prices are roughly 3.52 times higher today.
Okay, let's start with the base unit, just the Plus4 computer itself, the keyboard, and the internal brains. In 1984, it launched at £250.
Adjusted for 2026 inflation, that base unit costs roughly £881 today.
£881. But as we just spent 10 minutes explaining, you cannot run this business suite on cassette tapes. 4-base demands a disk drive. The Commodore 1541 disk drive costs £220.
That translates to £775 today, just for the floppy drive peripheral.
So if you want the actual functional business package, the computer plus the required drive, you are spending £470 in 1984 money.
Which is a staggering £1,656 in 2026 money.
Over £1,600 for a computer that draws a bar chart using the hashtag symbol.
It is a phenomenal amount of money for such a compromised experience.
And we can't forget that Commodore, in their infinite wisdom, actually tried to slice this market even thinner by releasing a crippled younger brother to the Plus4, right? The Commodore 16.
Yes, the C16 was designed as a starter pack. It launched at a much lower price point of £129.95.
Which is about £458 today.
But the C16 was an absolute shadow of a machine. It used the same case design as the old VIC-20, not the sleek new Plus4 shell. Crucially, it completely lacked the 3+1 software ROMs. There was no built-in word processor or spreadsheet. Furthermore, it only came with 16K of RAM in total.
Wait, 16K total. We just established that dropping the Plus4 into high-resolution graphics mode immediately eats 10K of RAM just for the frame buffer.
Exactly. If a user on a C16 tried to access the high-resolution graphics, the machine was left with a feeble, practically useless 2K of available memory to actually write a program.
2K? What can you possibly program in 2K? Hetherington pointed out that the software industry took one look at the C16 and just laughed.
They did.
If you were a commercial game developer, how do you write a compelling game in 2K of RAM on a machine that has no hardware sprites? You don't. You ignore it entirely. The C16 was dead on arrival for serious developers.
But returning to the flagship Plus4, the fatal flaw wasn't just its own high price point or its crippled younger sibling. It was the external competition.
The competitor clash. Commodore aimed this machine squarely at the burgeoning small business market, which meant they were directly challenging the Sinclair QL.
And Tony Hetherington laid out the market comparison with brutal clarity. The Plus4, when bundled with the mandatory disk drive, was actually £70 more expensive in 1984 than the Sinclair QL.
And the QL, despite having a notoriously rocky launch regarding hardware reliability, was widely considered a vastly superior, far more innovative product.
It was. It utilized a 32-bit architecture internally, and its built-in software suite, which was developed by Cyan, was genuinely professional grade.
The Cyan suite drastically outperformed Commodore's Hashmark, generating 3+1 apps in every single metric.
The QL didn't have the instant on-ROM loading. It relied on microdrive. But once the software was loaded, it was a proper business environment.
So what was Commodore's sales pitch? How do you sell a machine that is more expensive and less capable than the competitor?
They were forced to rely on an incredibly weak defensive argument. They argued that because the Plus4 used proven technology, meaning the heavily derivative 7501 processor and old drive standards, it would be inherently bug-free compared to the cutting-edge unstable QL.
Which is objectively hilarious considering Hetherington had to open up the case of his review unit and found a motherboard covered in hand-soldered patching wires and EEPROMs.
It was a complete mess inside.
The machine was literally held together by hope and electrical tape, and they're pitching it as a beacon of stable, proven engineering.
So when we synthesize all of this, the hardware compromises, the software quirks, the economic realities, we arrive at the devastating core dilemma that Hetherington articulated in his conclusion. The Plus4 was a machine entirely without an audience.
It pushed away the exact people who loved Commodore. The Commodore 64 was still sitting right there on the shelf. It was actually about £30 cheaper than the base Plus4, and it was infinitely better for entertainment.
It had the sprites, it had the SID chip, it had a massive library of incredible games. If you wanted to have fun, you bought a C64.
But if you were a serious professional, an accountant or a writer, The Plus4 was too frustrating. You were constrained by the 40-column screen, you had to battle the clunky visual clutter of subscript, and you were paying a premium for a machine that was objectively less powerful than the Sinclair QL.
It alienated the hobbyists, and it completely failed to impress the professionals. Its entire existence relied on a single, flashy gimmick, the instant-on-ROM loading.
It was a parlor trick designed to dazzle you in the showroom, distracting you from the fact that the underlying machine was a confused, compromised mess.
It is a phenomenal case study in a company misreading the market, believing their brand name alone could force consumers into a subpar ecosystem.
So, to pull all these threads together and summarize this deep dive, the Commodore Plus4 stands as one of the most monumental cautionary tales in consumer technology.
It really does.
It is a masterclass in what happens when a company fundamentally misunderstands or perhaps intentionally ignores the desires of its own user base.
They changed standard joystick and cassette ports for no technical reason, purely to force lucrative peripheral sales, which immediately bred resentment.
They gutted the beloved iconic hardware features like sprites and the SID synthesizer just to save a few pennies on manufacturing.
And they staked the entire future of the platform on a clunky, deeply flawed, integrated software suite that required split-screen workarounds and literal find-and-replace text hacks just to make a bar chart presentable to a bank manager.
It couldn't compete with the serious business rivals, and tragically, it couldn't even compete with its own older brother.
It's a tragic waste of silicon, but it leaves us with a genuinely profound, provocative thought to mull over, one that is highly relevant to the tech giants of today.
Oh, definitely. What is that?
The success of any major tech platform, whether it's a 1984 microcomputer or a modern smartphone, relies entirely on a vibrant ecosystem of third-party developers.
The game makers who relied on the C64's sprites built Commodore's empire.
They created the software that made the hardware valuable.
Exactly. So what happens to an entire industry when the platform holder arbitrarily decides to pull the rug out from under those creators?
When a company decides to abandon the community that built them in pursuit of a completely different theoretical demographic.
It makes you wonder, does a piece of hardware have a soul? Is its identity defined by the engineers who solder the chips? Or is it defined by the chaotic, creative community of users who figure out how to push it to its absolute limits?
And more importantly, can a corporation survive when it tries to forcibly overwrite that soul with a spreadsheet? History suggests the answer is a resounding no.
The rocket doesn't stay in motion if you actively steer it into the swamp. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into this strange, frustrating world of the Commodore Plus4. We will catch you on the next one.